So I was going back to work to get some stuff the other day, just a box as an archery target. I was off to introduce another coworker to World of Warbow archery, and I ran into two other coworkers. We got to talking and turned to archery. They wanted to see the warbow and some my arrows, and so I let them. And eventually, one of my coworkers asked a question that I thought about myself, thought about the answer to, but I'd never answered it to someone else. It was the question of kind of Arlie Ermy when he did his thing about longbows and crossbows, and he said, so basically the longbow is the machine gun and the crossbow is a sniper rifle of the medieval period, or whatever the hell he said. And yeah, this coworker asked me that question almost word for word. I imagine he probably saw that episode. And I said, I'll just tell you my answer. He said, no, no, not really. Weapons that are more analogous to the longbow and crossbow would be artillery and the assault rifle. The reason I say that is I'll talk about the crossbow first. When you look at the assault rifle in, say, Vietnam, so the M16 and AK-47, what are they made for? Well, they're made for sending rounds downrange, obviously, but also being very easy to use. Not necessarily rugged. The AK-47 was famously rugged. The M16 had a lot to be desired, but mainly it was sending rounds downrange and being very easy to use, which they were. And so let's look at the M16, for example. The conscription program basically meant that you were going to have people you don't know everything about them. You can't guarantee that they're a certain way. So and you want to get as many people as possible. So you set a minimum IQ standard. Now, I know IQ isn't fully representative of a person's being and intelligence, but it is a half decent baseline. Let's say, I don't know what the minimum IQ was, but let's say it was 100. Um, just for the sake of argument. In combat, it can be expected to drop, I think the number is like 20 or 30 points. So, and that's in intense combat. Of course, intense combat changes with experience and practice. So I'd say, all right, you need a weapon that can be used by someone who has an IQ of 70 because that IQ is going to drop in combat. So in that case, you need a weapon that's very easy to use. It needs to be able to be used by the dumbest 16 or 18-year-old out there. That is not to say that those soldiers were dumb. No, far from it. Many of them were very, very intelligent. But you want to get as many bodies into the field as possible. So, and you want all of them to be able to use their firearms effectively. So have a weapon that is able to be used by the dumbest 16-year-old out there. So make it simple. So simple, in fact, that you can teach him how to use it in a day or even less. Show him how to load it, how to cock it, how to shoot it, how to clean it, how to take care of it. That's all they need to know. There you go. Accuracy can come later. You need the bodies in the field. They'll learn with time. And yeah, at boot camp, sure, you can teach them accuracy. But if you need to cut something out, just cut that accuracy down a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, because everything else needs to be taken care of. They'll learn in the field. So you can see where the crossbow comes in is very analogous to that. It is a simple weapon. You so for the really late medieval period ones, so 14th, 15th century ones, even into the 16th century, what do? Well, you make sure that the roll nut, the gap, is vertical. You bring the string back, lock it into the roll nut. Oh, and you got to make sure that the tickler is locked into the bottom of the roll nut. And then you load a quarrel, bring the crossbow up, squeeze the tickler, and the shot falls. And you can look down the crossbow, just like you can a firearm. With a bow, you knock an arrow, draw back the string, and release. It seems more simple, but it's not, because it requires far more practice. See, with a longbow, I could probably teach someone to be proficient in about a week. If I'm working with them every single day, be proficient in a week, be exceptional in probably a year or two, and be an expert in about maybe a decade. Be absolutely an expert at using their bow, and that's a longbow. So at all ranges, we're not talking about target shooting. We're talking about shooting across all ranges, across different types of terrain, in different positions, in different ways, at different targets. Um, and yeah, so it takes a lot of time. I could probably teach that same person how to use the crossbow to proficiency, exceptionalism, and expert status in probably about 30 minutes, a week, and a month. Maybe 2 months for expert. That is quite a discrepancy. So the crossbow is much easier to use. And a 6-year-old could span a crossbow. I mean, like, for example, I think it was the English windlass that had a 25 to 1 mechanical advantage on 1,000-pound bow. Shit. But my little cousin could span that. Not sure she could shoot it. She might not have hands strong enough to uh, pull on the tickler, and uh, she'd hate the recoil, because they do have a lot of recoil. Um, about like a 20 gauge, or a 20 gauge for a rifle, it'd be like a 30-30 or something. Um, but she could span it. With the longbow, she could not draw my lightweight warbow. It's only 90 pounds. That is a very light warbow. And she can't even draw my 25-pound bow. So she would have to wait years to be able to even begin to draw a 25-pound bow, and then many years again to get to the warbow. Um, Now, onto the warbow being artillery, I see it being very analogous to that because of how artillery works. Yes, it's direct fire, but it's along many different ranges. And not only is it across many different ranges, but it's also en masse. I know that the Genoese crossbowmen use their crossbows en masse. But the longbows do things in a little bit of a different way. So, for example, take Lindy Beige's video on artillery. He talks about at one point how there was a study done that showed that morale of an enemy force goes down by 50% for every 5% of the enemy killed. It was something like that. And he doesn't think, and I agree with him, that it was because 5% are dead. It's more along the lines of what it takes to kill 5% of the enemy. If you watch um, medieval myth busting, Arrows versus Armor from Todd's workshop, you'll hear, and it's commented on, the noise. Those arrows are loud when they hit the armor. And not only are they loud, but there's so much shrapnel. And they're fast. And it hits that armor hard. It doesn't penetrate, but it hits hard. And if you were standing, it might knock you back. And from heavy enough arrow on strong enough bow, it might knock you on your butt. So you're probably gonna get hit. Like if you got 1,000 archers aiming at you, you're in a group of say 500 in 100 square yard area. Each of those archers is not aiming at that 100 square yard area. They're aiming at a soccer goal sized area. So then, 1,000 archers are all aiming at the same space. Maybe there are 30 archers aiming where you are. You're probably going to get hit. And it's going to hurt. You're going to be scared. And then a guy next to you, well, an arrow might go through his eye slit or into his throat, or it hits his knee. And you've always known he's had a really bad knee, and it breaks his knee. I mean, it's just a bad place to be. And so I think the longbow it's very effective en masse on a field, much like artillery. It also takes years of training to really be any good. And yes, they can use direct fire. Yes, they can fight hand to hand. But in this comparison, yeah, it's very artillery-like. Um, and another difference between longbows and crossbows that I think is important to understand, it's kind of like an icing on the cake for this discussion. It doesn't really matter, but yeah, I'll throw it in there anyway. Is with the longbow in a siege, down below or up above, doesn't matter. You're in danger because if you want to shoot, you have to expose your body, and it is very hard to shoot over something or through something or around something. Um, Most of us are not Lars Anderson. Um, and even him, I don't know that he could draw a warbow, and if he could, I don't know if he could use it effectively. Um, and if he could use it effectively, I'm not sure he'd be very fast. Uh, I mean, yeah, in a siege with a longbow, you're in danger because you are very exposed. With a crossbow, you're in a very good position because you can have that loaded for hours on end, just waiting for someone to show themselves. It's not going to take hours, but hypothetically, you could be waiting for hours on end. Someone shows themselves for a little bit too long. You come through the kind of crenellations and shoot, and you can aim down the crossbow. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be from Genoa. You can just be some bloke who came into the town a little bit early because you heard the bad news, and then some knight came in with a bunch of crossbows and say, "Hey, you're you're with me." Or the Castilian turned to you and went, "You know how to shoot a crossbow? No. Want to learn? Not really. Wasn't a question. Get up here." And that bloke can be taught how to shoot a crossbow in an hour. I'd be very good. So that's where the difference lies. Um, so if that answered a question that you had, I'm glad. If it didn't, oh well. I hope the video was entertaining. And if it wasn't, give me a thumbs down.